Chapter 4 Goodbye, Sydney. Nearly frantic with anxiety, Mrs. Small sat watching from the window. If all three boys were lost, how could she call on the police for help? She herself was nothing but a fugitive, running away from her lawful husband. It was quite dark when they returned. Jim and Emma were already asleep, but everyone else was in the parlor, waiting for the explanation, which had to be a good one, or it would be the stick for all three. "We've got donkeys," said Archie. "Remember that ship we told you about, the Armenian?" said Jack. "He's a judge from India and he's famous," said Bill. When the story was disentangled, there was no stick for the boys, only amazement and joy. There was a passage on this chartered ship, the Armenian, and more than that, there was work, both on the voyage and when they arrived in New Zealand. New Zealand. Mrs. Small repeated the name warmly. This was what she had really hoped for. A country more like England, without the harsh dryness of New South Wales. "We've got to travel in the steerage, and they've got Indians, but they won't hurt us. They're black men, but not like our blacks," said Jack. "They look at us like this," said Archie, turning his eyes from side to side without moving his head. "And where do we travel?" asked Mrs. Small. The three were silent. There was a blow to deliver. Archie and Jack looked at Bill, and Bill screwed up his courage. "There's a tiny cabin with a big berth enough for Emma to sleep with you." "But we need another berth." "That's all the places there are," said Bill, twisting his toes on the carpet. Mary Ann rose and ran from the room. It was all too plain. There was no passage for her. She lay on her bed with the crocheted cover and pulled the pillow over her ears, and did not move until Mrs. McCracken came in to put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "What are they saying?" she whispered. "Your mother won't go without you," said Mrs. McCracken kindly. "She must! She must!" Mary Ann sat upright. "How can she stay? There isn't any other ship." "I know that, my dear. She says she'll go to the judge and plead with him to find room, or she will not go at all. It doesn't seem a hopeful prospect, but your mother is very good at speaking up for what she must have." "No! Oh, Mrs. McCracken, you heard what Bill said. They've seen all over the ship, and there isn't a place. And Mr. Cracroft Wilson is such an important gentleman. It's because he needs the boys that they can go, and he doesn't need me. What can we do? You could stay here with me, and I'll keep your passage money, and Mr. McCracken will put your name on the list for a ship." "But if Father should find me?" "Sydney is a big city. He could look for a long time without finding you, and then, when you must go out, Mr. McCracken would go with you." Mary Ann twisted her handkerchief in her fingers over and over. At last she said quietly, "Do you think I might find a situation? I can cook very well, I think, and keep house neatly, and I should like some money of my own." "Now, that's a splendid idea. You could buy yourself some pretty things. Mr. McCracken could recommend you to one of his clients at the bank. Will you go and tell them, or shall I?" "You go, please, Mrs. McCracken." It was easy to be brave with only the two of them in the quiet bedroom. But out there, looking into the face of the mother she had never been away from in all her life, it might be different. Mary Ann watched the door close, then she went to the window and drew aside the curtain. Over the hillsides were scattered the lights of 100 lamps. Ships' lanterns gleamed faintly over the harbor, and along her own street moved the bright lights of a carriage. And ever since they had emigrated to Australia, she had seen nothing at night but the moon and the stars and the dark shapes of the trees. The great city! Bent all day over the table and the sewing machine, and not daring to go into the street for fear that her father should come, she had hardly seen anything of it. Only the handbills for the theatre and the travelling circus, the spires of the churches and the rumours of a library with thousands of books. "If I must stay, I'll make the most of my chances," Mary Ann vowed to herself. The door opened and Mrs. Small came in, smiling, to give her a warm hug for her courage. Back in the parlor, there was another serious question to be asked. Think carefully, boys, said Mrs. Small. When you were asked your names, what did you say? Bill, of course. Jack, Archie, and Small? I don't think we did we, Jack? They didn't ask our second names. Mrs. Small looked pleased. You must have a guardian angel, I think. It would be so easy to name yourselves. But why shouldn't we, Mother? Because from now on we're not Smalls. We shall have a new name that your father won't know, so that he can't ask where we are. I'm going to be Mrs. Phipps. Then I'll be Bill Phipps. Bill said his new name slowly, as if he were tasting a new kind of cake. Then he grinned, as if it tasted good. He shook hands all around. How do you do, Jack Phipps? Pleased to meet you, Archie Phipps. Am I really Archie Phipps, Mother? She ruffled his hair and drew him closer. It's a game of pretend. Don't you think it's a nice name to choose? No, said Archie. Wait till I tell you a story, she said. When I was a girl in London, I had a playmate named Lavinia Phipps. Her mother was dead and her father was very poor. And one day he stole a dress for her because she hadn't anything decent to wear. He was caught and put in prison and sentenced to be transported to Tasmania. But on the way to the ship, he managed to jump out of the cart and run away. The people in our street hid him until he could take Lavinia and go to work in Manchester. Did Lavinia keep the dress? Asked Archie. No, but I helped your grandmother to make her another one. And they never found Mr. Phipps or Lavinia, so I think it's a lucky name. And now you must all practice remembering it. So a game was invented and played all the time during the last day in Sydney. Whatever anyone might be doing, another could interrupt with a question, like Bill pretending to be the coach driver, asking for the full names of his passengers, and they had to answer, Jack Phipps, Archie Phipps. Mrs. McCracken kept a scoreboard with a tick for every time they said Phipps and a cross for every time they said Small, until nobody was scoring any crosses. As for Emma, her mother made her a special song. What's your name? Emma Phipps, Pete Stones and Orange Pips. Kiss the lips of Emma Phipps. Emma could not sing more than the first line, but she had the Emma Phipps part right. After one more day, when the horses were loaded and the ladies and gentlemen in their cabins, the Armenian was ready to sail. At dawn, the Phipps family went down with Mr. McCracken to help with the boxes on a hired dray. And Mary Ann, not a bit stern, hugged and kissed them all as they left the house, and sat by the window to watch the harbor. The Armenian used all her 60 horsepower to move out from the wharves, while the Phipps children, all longing to look, had to stay below decks. But now in the open waters, the sails were set to catch the westerly breeze, and Jack and Jim crept out. Jim was quite fit now, apart from a haze in his mind about how he came to be here when he could not even remember leaving Berrima. A young sailor, busy with the ropes, looked over in a matey sort of way. Ahoy there, shipmate! And what do they call you now? Jim Small, said Jim promptly. Jack could have clouted him, but he had to think fast, and to his own surprise, the words came smoothly out. Isn't he funny? He gets his nickname the wrong way round. We call him Small Jim. Small Jim Phipps. Jack finished up with a good laugh, so that Jim could not help laughing too, till he nearly lost his balance with the rolling of the ship. Look to your sea legs, shipmate, or you'll spend your voyage sitting down, teased the young sailor, and with a stride that seemed to roll with the Armenian's motion, he passed on to his next task, taking no further notice of Small Jim Phipps. End of chapter 4.